Hello, welcome to this video. My name is Richard. I'm an English language teacher and a professional coach. I help people who feel like English is the only thing holding them back in their careers or in their personal goals. And today, I'd like to help you with a pretty specific problem that many of my students have. A lot of my students feel like they have no problem speaking English to do their jobs, the actual day-to-day tasks of their career. But they feel like they don't have the confidence to hang out with people, to speak English, to socialize, and to network. And there are many reasons for this, but at more advanced levels, some of the big ones are that you don't have phrasal verbs, expressions, or idioms, the right vocabulary that's appropriate for more informal kinds of conversations. The negative impact of this problem, it can make you feel lonely. If you are working in English, and especially living in a place like the UK, Canada, or the United States, then if it can be difficult to make friends, but easy to do your work, right, we want to help you to socialize and connect better. So to help you with this, I'm sharing with you today in this video a conversation between me and my friend Zan. We're just hanging out, so it's my invitation to you to join us, to just hang out with us. And to help you, in the link below this video, I've put a list of 50 words and phrases that we use in this conversation that are more advanced. They include definitions, example sentences, synonyms, everything you need to learn the words, and it also includes a practice test to help you check your understanding. So allow me to introduce my friend Zan. Zan and I have been friends for a long time. We're both from the United States. We both speak a very similar version of English, being from Tennessee. And Zan is an English teacher too, but he also works in the coffee industry. So he has a pretty cool combination of skills and an interesting way of bringing English learners and coffee drinkers together into the same conversation. One of the things that he does is he has a cafe here in Memphis, Tennessee called Boycott Coffee. They have excellent coffee. And he also has a project called the Alphabet Book of Coffee. In the Alphabet Book of Coffee, he organizes alphabetically different themes and vocabulary around the coffee industry for English learners and people who are just interested in coffee. So if that's you, if you're a coffee drinker or an English learner, then I think you'll find this conversation pretty interesting. So without any more delay, go ahead, grab that list of vocabulary below, like and subscribe the video if this helps you, and let's dive into the conversation. Good luck. Tell me, who are you? I'm just kidding. I'll introduce you. So actually what I'll do is for each of these episodes where I interview people, there's going to be, like you watch Lex Friedman and he's got his like, the following episode is a conversation with da 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 da, and he like gives you a little spiel. So I'll have like a little bit of a spiel at the beginning of everything.
Yeah.
But no, first, just how do you introduce yourself when you're at a party? What do you say?
Yeah, I say that my name is Alexander, and then people will say, I heard it's Zan. I
Do
said,
you
"Hey."
do you actually introduce yourself as Alexander?
Yeah, my students, the Z has always been difficult to hear and to pronounce, but it's easier for them to say or get close Alexander, and they can understand it.
Uh-huh.
And so I started doing that years ago. Plus, I like the name because it's my name.
Mm-hmm.
And but
Woo.
people are angered by it who know me. They're like,
Uh-huh.
"It's not how I know you," and I'm like, "Well, I can go by my full name." But
When did you start being called Zan? Do your parents call you Zan or you're like
I think they did, but they uh we didn't talk to each other in the house, so I never heard my name. No, but no, they started it, and then there was too many Alexes in my class in elementary school, and so
lots of
Zan.
Alexes in our
Yeah, I was the
generation?
default. Yeah. hmm Too
Alex
many
Jordan,
greats. Too many greats.
Jordan.
Yeah, all
So
the like second string biblical characters had a good run in the 90s.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
mhm.
Bartholomew. No,
Yeah.
that's third string maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But like
Bart.
Stevens, a lot of Stevens.
Thomas is my middle name.
Thomas is my first name.
Look at that.
Go figure.
So you're pretty much everybody calls you Zan that knows you, and then for people that you just meet, it's Alexander.
Hmm. And then they have the liberty of deciding
Which one?
which one's easy. And
Do you tell them that in the beginning? You can choose.
they find out. Yeah, they find out one way or another.
Uh-huh.
Like, what did that person just call you? I said, oh, I had another life.
Uh-huh.
So,
You and I have known each other since I think we were about 18, right? I think we met in like freshman year of college at somebody's apartment or something.
not true. Um, we probably started to know each other. I think our first one-on-one conversation happened in college. It was very sweet. But we actually, I met you. You were 18, I think, but you were leaving for college, and I got invited to, I think, a Bible study or something,
Uh,
or maybe it was a graduation thing. It was church related, and I got invited through a mutual friend, and you were, um, I think, there was some like mix of a going away thing, but you were rolling around with the dog, and and I was
on the
like,
floor in the corner
yeah, I was like,
by ourselves.
You were speaking to the dog in a French accent, saying, "Tell me your name. What is your name?"
And you're like, who is this
This
weirdo?
guy I hope to never run into on campus. Did uh,
Yeah, that
and
sounds right.
it was, but the reason you actually, I don't know why you felt compelled to to say hey, but we were out near. I don't even think the UC was ready. But
But
we
yeah, the
the
university center.
university center, and
Mhm.
but you were talking about this girl who was in Italy, and
Oh,
you were like
uh-huh.
asking if you were crazy for wanting to date her.
We've
It
had
was-
a lot of these kinds of conversations where
Mhm.
I feel like probably, I don't know, once every few years we'll sit down and we'll have coffee or something, and then we don't get up for 3 or 4 hours because we start talking about some major life change that one or the
Mhm.
other one is going through. Either
Yes.
like, yeah, you're thinking about proposing to someone, or you're like planning to move away or start a business. Remember that conversation we had about Connect Language Center uh
Yeah,
and
across town.
at Crosstown? Yeah.
Mhm. It was a very yeah, we had a very like it was a very curb conversation.
Like I feel like I would go out and apply for a bank loan after talking to you.
Yeah. You wouldn't be approved. So
And then get denied.
you have such good spirit and tenacity, but yeah, I'm sorry. Who did you listen to?
Yeah. So we've you're an entrepreneur and I'm an entrepreneur, and so we've always connected on that.
Mhm.
Um, but back to my question of when you introduce yourself at a party. So Alexander, Zan, and
Mhm.
then in the USA we like to ask this question a lot. What do you do? It's,
Mhm.
for your job. So how do you describe how you spend most of your time?
Yeah, I try to keep it brief. I say that I teach and design uh, classrooms for English language learners, and that I work in coffee, which is a wild understatement, but
Yeah.
it avoids a longer conversation.
Uh-huh.
But yeah.
And since we're having a longer conversation, and you work in coffee, so what all does that include at the moment? You have a few different things.
Got a few different things. The big thing is the brick and mortar and the roasting business. So I have a cafe downtown in Memphis, and then we also roast and retail and wholesale coffee beans, and that's become kind of a very makes my week very packed.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, and then there's a few other little coffee projects sprinkled through just to kind of keep my interest beyond just the day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
That. that I've got going on. So, but
Mhm.
trying to fold everything all into one thought,
Yeah.
uh, as opposed to switching gears throughout different jobs or tasks throughout the day has been its own very laborious mental exercise, but I'm getting there. But that's
Switching hats. Switching
mhm.
hats. Yeah.
Trying to
From
have
a
one hat with just different.
wide brim
There you go. Hmm.
sombrero
That's
with big,
sombrero. Yeah.
yeah. So you've got your cafe downtown, which is amazing, by the way. It's Boycott Coffee,
Hmm.
which is a really fun name and a lot to unpack in that name.
Hmm.
And then you also have the ABC coffee tapes, and that's been a fun project to watch. And my understanding is that you're at kind of different moments of sharing in terms of uh, volume or output. But what letter are you currently on, and can you share about that?
Yeah. So the schedule when I came up with this almost a year ago was that I would probably be finished with it um, next month. Currently, I'm not even halfway through.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so the idea was that every 2 weeks I'd come out with a coffee and a topic that were organized alphabetically.
Uh-huh.
So just to be very literal, A would be one week, B the next. Oh, hold on, I'm
Yeah,
writing
I
it.
got you. I can hear you.
Um, and it was going pretty smooth, but burnout set in real quick. It was very interview based, and it was also whenever I had a free moment throughout the week. And so conflicting schedules, lifestyle changes has definitely made that project a little weighty,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it still gets good attention, still gets good support. The people who have, there was an opportunity in the beginning to subscribe to receive physical copies of these like interviews in cassette tape form, as well as a small dosage of coffee beans. Um, the
So
reason for
yeah,
that,
every week you've got a theme, right?
yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
and
Mhm.
then and of course it's alphabetical. So
Mhm.
with each theme you're getting actual coffee to try and
Mhm.
sample, whole bean, and then you're also getting a cassette tape of some kind of content, usually an interview around the topic related to the theme. I think it's amazing.
Well,
And
thank
then
you.
yeah, and then you've got a super fun Instagram around it too that gives us like the all of the visual aspect of the project. Um and man, I totally understand burnout making content, especially because you and I think in a similar way around quality. Like
Mm.
we want to make the kind of content for other people that we would consume ourselves, and we want it to be thoughtful and authentic and creative, and we want it to be good, and to make, because there's so much stuff on the internet to consume and look at that's good and entertaining, it can be a tall order to have like a high standard to put into a project like that, especially when it's like the thing that you're doing in addition to all the other work you're doing in your life. If you have, one or two or three jobs or whatever you're doing. Um, so I'm always cheering on my friends when they take on stuff like that because it's a really cool project. And I mean, even if it takes you 2 more years to finish, who cares? I think it's cool just that like it continues and it's there, and you're building a kind of community around it of people who intersect at coffee and language learning or literacy or English. And so, um, yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, it is really always nice to hear um yeah, some empathy pointed your way. And especially when it feels kind of you're mostly apologetic around projects that aren't fitting your own expectations or demands. And then you get like
Or
these kind of
timeline or something.
anything, yeah. And and then these little olive branches that supporters give that are just kind of showing, not that they don't care. There's never been a moment where it's like, it doesn't matter what you produce. Um, but when there's an understanding of what the project entails, almost more so than what I was letting on or what
Yeah.
I thought. I drastically, I think, underestimated what I was getting involved in.
Uh-huh.
And even when there were people who were, again, like you just said, people in your corner cheering you on who are like, but at the same time, maybe you should pump the brakes every so often. And you're just like, no, I already wrote in in my notes app that this is what I was going to do. So
Right.
that's now it's on tablets.
Right,
Like
right.
these are the commandments that I have. So breaking free from that without hiding from the project has been months and months of kind of like an ordeal. And so, where I think procrastination was that first level, and then behind that is just like unbridled, just fear of not even failure, but success.
Uh-huh.
And that I think was the shock with any of these projects, whether it's um, a budding career in education or in the coffee business or these side projects that are meant to be fun, but we can't let them just be fun.
Uh-huh.
um, is this idea of, I really hope it's just me doing this, because if people start to really get involved, then it's going to be,
More
there's going to be
work.
a level of success that I have to
Yeah.
be obligated to, and that's going to suck. And that's what's been
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
And my worst nightmare is that it's working.
Uh-huh. Well, then comes the inevitable question of monetizing a project
Mhm.
because you get to this point where you're like, if I'm going to keep doing this creative thing, then I'm going to have to stop doing these other things that take up so much of my time that make money and feed me. And so then how, it's this chicken egg kind of like, right. And then what if it's successful and I have to just dive in? And then what if it
Mhm.
becomes my full-time job? What if I have to, involve other people financially? You kind of go down these like whenever you dream about a project and you want it to become something that can like stand up in that way, you have to like you end up facing those sorts of questions like, okay, what's my commitment level? What kind of time and capacity or resource or whatever can I give to it? And what do I need to get back from it to be able to keep giving to it for when I
Mhm.
burn out or whatever? That's hard. It's the creative life, I feel like. And I I I like that you're talking to get back to the earlier thing you're mentioning about supporters of the project or who recognize it and they see, oh wow, this is a lot of work, like they give you that sort of like feedback of, man, keep going, this is great. They recognize it, they see it for what it is. And then um realizing that they don't know about the timeline that I have written down on my notes in my phone. Like they don't know that I was going to be hardcore about dropping one of these every week or whatever it is. Like, one, because they're probably not paying attention to me that closely, and two, they're probably like, we're just stoked this exists. Like
Mhm.
you thought of something that was so unique and specific, and it's so valuable in so many ways. It's like I feel like when I think about Big World, sometimes like my supporters are usually just they're just only stoked. They don't have any expectations that I'm like letting them down, even though in my head I put these big sort of like ambitious timelines or goals or whatever, and I'm stressing myself out about getting it to a certain point that's typically like very relative and subjective. And then when I think about like the people who I'm really helping at the end of the day, or like the people who really benefit from what I do, it's like they don't care. Like, I'm just excited to have another newsletter. Thanks. It's free and it's helpful or whatever.
No, yeah.
Um and yeah, anyways, tell me more about where the project is now. And yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of
It's funny that you mentioned not publishing like um, kind of the behind the scenes of our like own personal aspirations because I did that. And that was because I did that in order to kind of like, oh, these people will be upset with me and they'll hold me accountable if I give them deadlines. And if they're on a paid membership where every 2 weeks they get automatically
Um,
billed
yeah,
and they don't receive their product, they're going to say, hey, where's this thing that, there's a transaction in place.
yeah.
And so the the issue became that they are so gracious and gave me slack. And after about when it got to the point where I was like 5 tapes behind, and these things take, I know when I say like cassette tapes, it's either people are still, they're Googling that or
Yeah, for the youth.
they can't remember what that entailed. But if I have an interview that's anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes, and then I have the same amount of time dedicated to either a creative element or music or
Hmm.
something that can go on the other side of the tape, that tape, one tape, takes about 20 to 30 minutes to produce.
Hmm.
And then I have to make 20 to 30 of those. And so, and that's not the editing, that's not the artwork, that's not the roasting, that's not the interview, that is
Right.
just the packaging. So packaging one box that retails at $10 takes about 2 hours,
Hmm.
like all said and done, value assigned. And so when you look at, okay, that's each tape or each letter, if all goes well, is about a week's worth of work, a 40-hour
Hmm.
week, everything included. So interview, everything.
Yeah.
It it does kind of, yeah, it gets to you. And and so after a while, when I was so behind, I'd gone through the first like 4 or 5 months, pretty rocky, but we did it.
Yeah.
And then interviews had to get bumped. People were, whatever, not as available. The project started losing some momentum.
Hmm.
All the pieces stopped fitting in perfectly, essentially.
Hmm.
So it was one of those things where everything was dependent on the other to go so smoothly.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was no fault to any other party, but it was just circumstantial. And I've only sent like 2 or 3 newsletters. And the last one, or one of the last ones, was basically like, hey, here's what I owe you. You're going to get that by this date. I'm canceling all the subscriptions because I don't feel comfortable taking more of
Uh-huh.
this company. Um, and and I was kind of like, that was that. So here's the ultimatum. I didn't make that deadline. And then the response that I got was everyone resubscribed after I canceled their subscription. And I was like, this is again very sweet nightmare. I'm Sisyphus. It's like I
A
can't
very sweet nightmare. Yeah. Well,
like
I love that. I mean, that's
mhm,
kind of that what am I trying to say? That lifts up our point here of
you know
supporters
mhm,
are typically all love and then we're the critic and we're kind of worried about all these other things. I
yeah,
find that that tends to be the case.
it is, yeah. And so where the project is now, still playing catch up, still trying not to overthink things.
Yeah, that's hard to do.
Still, the goal now is to be more communicative and to be more open because I'm like, oh, that seems to work really well.
Yeah.
Is when I'm actually talking to these people who are giving me their time and at times money. And so that's been the thing, is kind of lifting the curtain to see like the crazy, man in the background. And so that's been the goal. And now I've, with very little planning, The Alphabet Book of Coffee will finally blend in with Boycott, and every week or so, starting from the top of the alphabet, I'll be in the cafe for a couple of hours presenting what has been learned and presenting these topics and brew methods and cultural and social issues surrounding coffee, as well as just fun
It's awesome.
things. And so it's now kind of learning from what has worked in the project beyond just the initial um, product side of things, and seeing that, wow, people are really mostly interested in the engagement part,
Yeah.
and not
The
just
community part.
that's right. And so if I can just, still commit to what I had promised and the intention to complete the project, but not let go of what has been gained from it beyond a monetary thing. And so now it's essentially, I'm sure you have the same kind of problem, which is stacking more and more on our plates in order to make things work. And so that's happening, and I can't stop it.
Uh-huh.
Um, but
Yeah. Yeah. Stacking the because you have again, it's a bit like where I think we are in common is it will start with some kind of dream or vision of what we want to do that's pretty clear in our heads of like, oh, it'd be so cool to make X or Y. And then when you dive into it, this is where I get in trouble with my wife sometimes. My wife is much more practical. She's much better at like planning and thinking through logistics and steps around ideas or plans. And so when I'm over there, like early in our marriage, one time we had a small little fight. I said, wouldn't it be fun? Listen to this. Wouldn't it be fun to fly to Albania and buy like an $800 car and drive to France? Don't ask me where the idea came from. But of course, we're very newly married and like figuring out our relationship. And she's like at the end of it, like, are you really wanting to plan and do that? And I was like, I don't know, maybe probably not, but what if? Yeah, and the kind of dream of it. But you get to this point with some dreams where you're like, no, I actually, yes, I do want to do that. And then you start doing it, and you start to see it unravel and unfold and get bigger and bigger, and you see how much it demands of you to do it the way that you intend and you want. And it can be a consuming sort of thing. um, so you have a what I love the most about it is the sense of community. And it sounds like the Alphabet Book of Coffee and even Boycott and your English language teaching, those three things really do have this. I mean, what's better than language and caffeine? It's language and coffee. Like so many people around the world love coffee, half of us at least, and then are half of us are also learning English. It's amazing. I love it. Sorry, I asked you to talk about something and now I'm rambling about
no,
it.
no, no. I mean, you're
Um,
leading into something that's, I mean, that was the first thing that you and I worked on together.
yeah,
So it
the
was
boycott you're saying. Or
caffeine.
Cafe English. Yes. So for the listeners, before I started Big World English, I opened with some friends. We started a language school here in Memphis, Tennessee called Connect Language Center. It's an in-person, you're a beginner with English all the way to more advanced, multiple levels and things. So we had this idea to basically have pop-up cafes inside the language school, and we would have native speakers from the community who would volunteer and come, and students could just come and buy a cup of otherwise more higher end coffee, but inside the language school and just practice English and have conversation. And it's still going on today. They still, I don't know if you see their posts, but they still do cafe English, and they've got an espresso machine
Yeah,
and like
the whole program's
the whole
alive and
deal.
well.
Yeah, it's so cool. Um, yeah, that was the first thing we worked on together
Hmm.
where we saw
like an immediate thing we could do with coffee and English. Um, we dreamed about you having a cafe at the top of the stairs from the language school.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But we were like, why not just start with a cart, like
Mhm.
a pop-up that,
Which
you know,
proved to be
brilliant.
invaluable. Yeah. So
Yeah.
when you, yeah, when you just kind of let the environment around you create the space, one, it clearly saved us a lot of money.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, we didn't have to build a cafe that relied on foot traffic because there was a time where the building involved was, talking about, employing staff and things like that
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And we just what did the students need at the time, and what
Yeah.
did volunteers want to interact with, and
Yeah.
it just worked out. I think way beyond what we were talking about when we just were sitting on those couches, just
Yeah.
coming up with something.
Well,
So,
one of the things that I think makes it the most powerful for English learners is that something I coach my students on a lot is that your reason for speaking is more important than your ability to say what you want to say perfectly.
mhm.
So your reason for speaking is more important than your ability to say what you want to say perfectly. What does that mean? So like typically what happens with a conversation class is you'll have a teacher might say, "Hey, today we're going to talk about whatever your favorite food," one of these typical ESL class kinds of topics, or maybe a more advanced level. We're going to talk about climate change or whatever, and then you just leave it at the topic. And the students, you might have one or two really confident students who raise their hand, and then they run their mouths for 5 minutes, and then the rest of the class that doesn't feel as confident just kind of sits there because their friend answered the question for the group, or they don't feel as confident as the most confident person in the room. And so a lot of newer teachers especially struggle just to get their students to speak. Like if we got a 2 hour conversation class, how am I going to get all of you to talk for 2 hours? And there's this teacher trainer named Penny who has this idea: talk about X to achieve Y. And X is the English language that makes us worried. Am I saying the right word? Am I pronouncing it correctly? And Y is the real world task that you want to complete that involves English. So you go to the airport, check in at the airport. That's Y. The X, you need to check your bags or whatever. Bake a cake. That's Y. But X is recipe English and numbers for measurements English and that kind of stuff. And so a lot of students get tripped up because they freeze on X and they forget about Y. And then they never complete Y, or they do complete Y, but maybe they do it with embarrassment or shame or frustration or something. So, what I love about tying English to something fundamentally like coffee, it's coffee dash English, is that you are building in inherently a reason for speaking. It's to communicate about coffee. Either we're actually sharing a cup of coffee and what's why today, just chat with my buddy over a cappuccino. Do you have the English level to do that? Yeah. Okay, great. Then you can confidently do it. Or if it's take an order from a customer, that's why. Just get the order.
Mhm.
Or create an order because you're exporting, or invoice an import client or something, like just by, in other words, I like sometimes the challenge that I think English teachers have is that they're constantly looking for reasons and topics and contexts, but you have that built into everything you're doing. Um, the cafe, like you have a physical space built into the topic. The cassette tapes, you have a physical thing. You have the actual bean, and so when you describe, here's vocabulary for smell and how to smell coffee, you have the actual thing to smell, and that's so much more dynamic of a experience for an English learner, because that's what language, we tend to think that language is just sort of words on a page, alphabets and grammar, kind of like math. It's this abstract sort of, but language is the actual being that you're holding in your fingers, that you're touching, and you feel the oil physically on your fingers, and you're looking at the color and the richness of it, and you're smelling the caramel or the nut or whatever. Like, that's language. And then we exhale and we make sounds at the same time to describe it. Anyways, so that's just something
Yeah.
I've always admired about how you approach your work. Is I think just from a language learning perspective, it's really cool.
Well, thank you. I mean, you're describing like the the pinnacle of the of this dream, and
Yeah.
actualizing it has proven to be, you know, constrained by what we talked about before, which is, life. But that is the goal is, this blending of all these things so that people can finally, it started with the idea that, we have a pretty wide international community and migrant community here in Memphis and many of them are from coffee producing regions
Mhm.
who don't feel welcomed or don't feel an expert when talking about the thing that comes from where they are
Yeah.
or where they
Yeah.
were.
A
And
disconnect from the
yeah,
consumer's
and
point of view. Yeah.
that's right. And either they feel that there is a wall or they can't express their expertise or they can't express their attachment to something
Yeah.
um, because they don't have the words
Yeah.
and or they don't have the right words or they know how to order something but they don't know how to explain why they want it.
Hmm.
um, or the worst is when they want something that even if it's a menu item that
Yeah.
is very particular, how do I customize an order? How do I tell this person without sounding a certain way? How do I control my tone?
Uh-huh.
um, and so yeah, these little projects, even though they're like, seem very vocabulary oriented, um, go into those kind of bigger ideas. And it's an attempt to, and something we achieved in Cafe English, it's an attempt to, yes, provide resources for one group, the language learner, but then also to remind native English speakers that this conversation piece is a two-way street.
Yeah.
And think about how you're communicating this topic to this person and how you're listening.
Uh-huh. Right.
And so the goal with, applying more physicality to it is that, okay, now that we've conceptualized these things, can we do this in a space like we know that we can, because
Right.
you and I have done that. And but can it be now conditional and focused?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. The part about it being a two-way street, I feel like is very overlooked.
Mm.
Um, that's there's a training that I sometimes do it's how to accommodate English language learners, and it's for native speakers. And the idea is that monolingual native English speakers working in these kinds of situations, interacting with English learners, just because they've never had the experience of learning a language or living in a different country, they just don't understand like pretty principal aspects of communication when someone doesn't speak English as, their first language. And so it's just very practical things like, hey, you need to slow down just a little bit. Like,
Mhm.
don't say I really look up to him, say I admire him. Like,
Mhm.
look up to is going to be less likely to be understood, or those kinds of things that you just don't think about. And I feel like the English learners, adult English learners, really shoulder the burden of communication sometimes more than they need to. Like,
Mhm.
they put all of the pressure of the communication on them. If they maybe work with an American or a Canadian or someone who only speaks English, there's this sort of belief or expectation, assumption that if there's a miscommunication or if there's a problem in our communication, it's my fault.
Hmm.
Or it's like probably my fault.
Yeah.
And that's, it would be surprising. I think I would love to see some studies or some research around this because I'm sure I know that there's more there. I just haven't dug deep enough that so much of the time it's really on the native speaker because they're thrown off that you have an accent. they just they just don't live in a community where they hear accents different from their own. And really your accent probably is actually nothing wrong with it from like an international perspective. You're probably clear 95% of the time, but this one person is just not used to it, and so they're distracted. And it's not that you're not clear, it's that this person lives a monocultural lifestyle. And it's yeah, interesting sort of like aspect. Another aspect of your work is that you have this advocacy piece built in because of the coffee industry, and that you're looking at things happening in the coffee industry that actually mirror what happens in these kinds of communication situations. That you have a consumer, typically in, like North America, for example, who don't have the empathy and understanding of the supply chain, from the farmer, uh, from the person actually growing the coffee to the time that it gets to you and you spend $7 for it in a fancy cafe. I just think that's so brilliant that there's this language piece and this advocacy piece around. It's like the third time I've just monologued to compliment you, Zan.
Oh,
I'm
it's good. Hey, I appreciate it.
yeah,
No, it's fun because it's, that, like you said, it's one factor or situation that they'll be in, but there's a plethora of situations that they'll be in where you could apply this, like, um uh kind of this synthetic immersive, like, environment, to where, like, we know that if we can create a safe space, these conversations will happen. And it's like, it's training, it's a, just a language, like, just shooting range of just people who are, feeling comfortable and confident to practice without feeling like, okay, I can just sit in the back of the classroom if the teacher isn't calling me, and I'm just gonna soak in everything, because I'm that kind of student, who will just kind of sit there and listen, and then a year goes by and you go, I guess that was a good course. I don't know. Um, but a lot of it comes from also, both of our professions of, I'm sure, like, engaging with the workforce side of things. Mine's more localized, and I think you have, I think, a wider regional reach, with people you've worked with. But um, you know, in the surprising reality of even, like, these Fortune 100 companies who struggle communicating with their largest employee base because there's a language barrier. And I'm monolingual, so I can empathize, and I don't pressure those to, if you don't need to speak the language because you live in an environment where that's the majority, then that makes sense. But that lack of, like you just mentioned, of accommodation,
yeah,
is severe in areas where it's shocking.
yeah,
And it makes you think, you've worked in the currently and in the past, and I am as well, with helping people through interview prep, or, coming up with scenarios. And then you kind of take a step back and you're like, how many students have I worked with to answer the same problem? You know, is it more beneficial just to go to the source and just say, hey, here's how you should probably restructure your questions?
mm-hmm.
And so, for instance, obviously you want people to interview well, but at the same time, how the phrase, like you just mentioned, idioms or phrases that we choose. Um, I only learned recently that, a very common question in an interview is, tell me a time, or tell me about a time that XYZ, that you face a challenge or whatever. how that so easily throws people off to where they say 6 p.m. is the toughest time for me throughout the day. And you're
Uh-huh.
like, that's not what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So we can have a whole lesson of what that means and how we look at time and, how grammar is applied and all this stuff. And that can go on and on and on for weeks.
Levels of
Or I can
meaning
just
and
go to the
yeah.
interviewer and say, can you just rephrase this?
Right.
And that solves everything.
Yeah.
So can you just say, tell me about a moment? And that
Yeah.
small change
Experience or something. Yeah.
changes everything to where it's not this constant, you know, building up and nurturing and tearing down of confidence. It's it's
Negotiation.
reinforcing
Hmm.
things.
Yeah.
And
Negotiation and conversation. And
right.
it's most of it is awareness, which
Hmm.
is, that's how we acquire our first language or just language at all is I always use this example of if a little kid like runs up to their mom or dad and says, "Mommy, I hurted my finger." That grammar hurted, right, is incorrect. Hurt is an irregular verb, and so it should be I hurt my finger. But if language is just behavioral and you're just we learn language because we just repeat what we hear. Well, that little boy didn't hear hurted from anyone around them, right?
Hmm.
Assuming they're just around native speakers all the time. They became aware at some point that actions in the past sometimes sound like ed or d or t, like played or picked, and they
Hmm.
hear those little sounds and their brain organizes them subconsciously and connects them to meaning,
Hmm.
and then they try to communicate and they take a risk and they say I hurted my finger because I also wanted my bunny, right? So doesn't that go the same way? And
Hmm.
then what happens is mom or dad says, I'm so sorry you hurt your finger.
Hmm.
And then they become aware that, oh, there's irregular verbs that they break the rules, subconsciously, of course. Well, it's the same thing for adults and workplaces even. Like just helping adults recognize like, hey, raising your voice doesn't make you more understandable. And they're like, oh yeah, I do that, don't I? Why do I do
Hmm.
that? That doesn't make sense. And they
Hmm.
start to listen to themselves, or like, hey, if you just listen to yourself and slow down just a little bit. Um, I had a teacher trainer in college that she for an activity, right? These are all mostly Americans learning how to teach. So she had this activity where she said, I want you to describe what you do for a living or for work or what you're studying, for example, but you can only use one syllable words.
Hmm.
So you can't say education. That's four syllables. You can say teach. That's one syllable. And so we're all sitting there like hardcore listening to ourselves, thinking about what we're going to say next. And it's slowing us down and we're having trouble finding the right words. And it's just this like wonderful, simple little exercise to show you this is the experience of someone learning English. They're sitting there looking for words, filing through the cabinet at a 20th of the speed that you can as a native speaker. They are very limited
Hmm.
to a select range of vocabulary. And then you have the follow up question of, okay, class, how did that make you feel trying to do that?
Hmm.
And typically people say, well, it made me feel like an infant. It made me feel frustrated, or it made me feel embarrassed, or like limited, or whatever. And it's that, like you just do that kind of exercise one time, and then you now all of a sudden have this new awareness, and then you're much more prepared to just negotiate meaning with people instead of being inflexible. Like, okay, I'm the interviewer, I'm the native speaker, and this woman from Honduras is coming to interview. Like, English is not her first language. If I could tell that she's not following me, like, I just repeat my question in a different way or something. Like, and it really is so it's quite simple is my
Hmm.
point.
Yeah. I mean,
But
it is, we do need a lot of, I mean, even me, I need prompting and I need redirection. I get that,
uh-huh.
students who feel comfortable to do that, especially with, in our field, there's so many different levels of um, of skill sets that you'll speak with one student, you'll get into a rhythm of full on just conversational.
Yeah.
You're not even counting the syllables in this one, but it's
Right.
everything's
Fluency.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the next person you run into is, visibly irritated with you because you're
Mhm.
speaking. Maybe it's dialed back, but not enough.
Right.
And speed is my biggest thing. Rambling is my biggest
Same.
thing because I get comfortable with my students and I get excited to be around them and I want to share and go deeper into things when in reality, just those kind of exercises that you're mentioning are what is comfortable, but what is so necessary. And I, a trick that I have is because I have the luxury right now of being around other teachers. And I know that for you, that can be, it can be kind of a little lonely sometimes, I'm sure, being out of that
Mm.
element.
Yes.
And so I'm still able to kind of look at others and have, very direct lines to some peers, even if I don't really appreciate uh really their style.
Mhm.
But I'm not, there's no name names, but as a, we'll call this a fictional teacher, but they are real. Uh, they this one teacher who, them as a person, them how they teach, how they think, everything. I'm just like, it is so aggravating.
Mm.
More. And
Mhm.
I'm, part of me is just like, just their mindset about certain things isn't like obtuse or anything, but just not where, I would want my, quote unquote classroom to be. And
Just like in their classroom management or the way they
classroom
teach
management,
or
them, how they communicate, just them as,
uh, uh
and as well as how they communicate with students. And then, but almost side by side, results are results. And you see, wow, the most, to me, aggravating English to listen to, the most annoying and frustrating speaker is, actually the best teacher for these students.
but
My ears, when
yeah,
they get frustrated because I as a person am antsy in conversation and I want things to keep going and going and to not have any lulls, is uncomfortable and irritable when there's a teacher who is actually speaking as a service for their students
mm,
as opposed to a service to themselves, which is sometimes how I teach.
that's a really interesting point that you can tell a really masterful teacher when you notice that they have no problem sitting there in silence.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of amazing. You'll watch these sort of veteran English language teachers. We talk about wait time, right? So if it takes me 10 times long, like my Spanish level is intermediate. So I need, you know, 5 times probably the amount of time when someone asks me a question to get my thoughts together. If I want it to be correct, I can respond quickly, but it will likely be incorrect. There'll be a mistake in there. But if you want me to thoughtfully respond correctly in Spanish, I need time.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see a teacher with a class, the really artful thing with language teaching that I love is when you see someone who knows how to do wait time and at the same time make the group feel comfortable like they're in a normal conversation. Like that's really fun. Those are real pros because you can see that there's not this like awkwardness of the silence. Um, but it's still, and like you're saying, that's a teacher who's they're speaking as a service to their class as opposed to let's listen to my ego for
Exactly.
30 minutes or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, if we can do some throwback, like it's, just watching TV, which we know that our students and even ourselves use entertainment to help us move along through our language learning. But children who are doing this, it's they might have an easier time with it. But Nickelodeon. I hated, I was just old enough or just young enough, and I think you were too, to where it wasn't inappropriate, but we were aging out of being able to watch Blue's Clues.
Uh-huh.
Um, shows Rugrats, SpongeBob, Hey Arnold, those were kind of our speeds, as
Uh-huh.
far as like young, youthful kids watching cartoons. But it's like that's how I look at kind of if I were to sit down a young, you know, student, a child learning English, even though they might be bored out of their minds, Steve from Blue's Clues, who just stares at the camera waiting
Mm-hmm.
and respond as opposed to just watching entertainment and watching a show that's there to entertain, that's there to flex, um, creativity, which is how, again, that's my biggest fault as a teacher is I just overload at times with, I mean, this one lesson I had, we were talking about, it's supposed to be engaging, it's supposed to be conversational, it's for a more advanced class. And I get bored as a teacher, with vocabulary and grammar,
Uh-huh.
and I want to move away from it. And I want to draw connections, and I part of it is an ego of, do you know what kind of spider web I can make?
Mm.
But you
Mm-hmm.
didn't think that Pablo Neruda could tie in with metaphor and purpose, and
Right.
and we start talking about art and throw in, literature, and then at the end of it, it's kind of like, what the heck did I just do?
Mm.
I created nothing from that except an entertainment and yeah, the self-grandizing of, I am
Like
this all
creative lesson
understanding.
plan
Yeah, exactly.
or
That
whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
that did less than what would have been if we had just read something together, applied it.
At a focused execution of
Exactly.
some, yeah. Well,
Mhm.
teaching is so hard. Language teaching is so, 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 so hard. Most people don't understand that. They don't recognize, like, if you have a class of 9 people,
Mhm.
and even if we are at the same level, really, like, we're probably only going to be like roughly in the same level. There's still going to be levels within that level and ability, that even if you're at the same level, this student's great at reading, but this student's like pre-literate.
Mhm.
They both at the same spoken English level.
Mhm.
Okay, well that totally changes how I use visual
Mhm.
textual scaffolding, right? Um, and then out of those 9 students, they could all be from 9 different nationalities and 9 different language backgrounds and cultures. And then you have their personalities as individuals and the complexities of their experiences and their families and their specific upbringings and their education. Like all these things make it so that it's just so difficult to teach
Mhm.
a language
I know.
to a class and you um, to me, it makes sense why a lot of teachers like to just open the grammar book and go through the exercises with everyone because it's safe. And
Mhm.
I know that everyone will get practice. I know that we'll all work on our irregular verbs or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, will we be inspired? Probably not, unless it's like an amazing grammar textbook. We're probably not going to be inspired or. So it's like it's just very hard to do. And back to that sort of principle of the supporter, loving what like students, if they're getting conversation practice, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe there wasn't this focused objective that was delivered and measured or whatever, but like we had a fun time. We talked about art and
That
English. We had
is.
we had conversation and I built my confidence up a little more. Like I try to remember that whenever I'm like, that class was a mess or that didn't go the way I planned or whatever. Um and yeah, some of the I've had those sorts of colleagues in the past where I'm like looking at the way I'm like, do you talk that fast to your students or do you like something about their approach to teaching or whatever it is like right aggravating or disagreeable in some way, and then you talk to their students and their students just love them,
Yeah.
and they're like, yeah, I always get feedback, I always get this or that, and you come to find that those teachers are just really good at they major in the things that they know will get results for the students,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
they're student centered in some way or they're
It's
good at
back to
wait
that
time or
whole thing of like, they're still here. So
Mhm.
something's working. It's as
Right.
simple as that,
They're
you know.
still employed.
I'm still employed, and
Right.
these students who could easily switch to another program,
Yeah.
are still here. The same with people who support us in other projects, like whether that be, people listening to the music we make or whatever it is. It's
Right.
just
Right.
something is keeping them around. Maybe it's just me, maybe it's convenience. I
Yeah.
don't know, but they're here and
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
But
So, because of time, I would like to change the subject on to something else that we have in common, which is Memphis, Tennessee.
yes,
And
I got
so,
about 5 minutes left.
okay, all right,
Finish
so
time?
we
Yeah.
can do this for 5 minutes. So we're
Okay.
both from Memphis, Tennessee. So for the listeners, the English learners, if you're listening to our accents, Zan and I share a lot of similarities. So, for example, Zan, how do you say the word pen, the writing utensil? How do you pronounce that word?
Say that again.
Yeah, like you're writing with a fountain.
Oh, pen,
Ah, say it again.
pen.
Yeah. So you and I, because we're from Memphis, we will pronounce the word pen, as pen, not pan.
Oh,
So, doesn't that sound weird to hear
yeah. I hate.
pen?
Don't. Yeah,
But
someone from. They're still from the South. I know someone who she's from Virginia. She says pencil,
pencil. So
pencil.
the pen is technically the correct pronunciation if you look it up in a dictionary. It's p-e-n, but we say in Memphis p-e-n. So it's pin, like a pen, like a Google pen, like on the map, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's one thing you love about Memphis?
I mean, you can tell who's from here just by talking to them, and or who has moved here, or who's got a nice blend of. We have a very, just to keep it topical, but it is something I'm interested in. We do have a very unique way of communicating. And to those who might be unfamiliar with how to speak to one another in Memphis, it can be jarring because we are not a cookie cutter city.
No.
And at the same time, there is so much, you know, visible separation and remnants of segregation in the city. Yet, for the most part, uh, barring invitations or barring comfort levels of going anywhere in the city, people know how to communicate with one another.
Hmm.
And I think people are surprised when they hear someone who's got a very deep Memphis accent that they can understand it and it feels homey.
Between
Yeah, it
dialects
feels like,
even.
how do I know that? How do I know what you're saying? Because now with, social media, we can see, you know, people's commentary on how Memphis speaks because it is very unique. And, there's, movies around the accent. And yet when we're listening to it, we're just like, but that somehow sounds, I know it's not normal, but it sounds normal to me.
Hmm.
And the funniest thing is when we'll be teaching a class at whatever level, and they're like, but that's not how my coworker speaks,
Uh-huh.
whether they're in a warehouse or whatever. And then you have to go into slang and you have to explain what slang is. And because that's not a term that's transferable in any way. And
Or
uh,
just dialect differences,
that's
African
right.
American vernacular of English
That's right.
versus prescriptive. Yeah, I mean,
So blended here that yeah, you just know that you're in a new city
yeah,
when you've been here before.
yeah,
It's just nice. So
yes,
it also
yes,
makes
it
it for
is.
one of the worst environments to learn English. But if you can learn it here, you could probably go
Uh,
to Minnesota and do a really good job.
yes, you could,
Yeah.
right? Yep, just come to Boycott Coffee. And so you're doing that on Sundays, you said?
Sundays, I don't, people are asking what it is, and I don't know. But but I threw it out. So Sundays, 11 to 1, Alphabet Book of Coffee will be popping up at my business.
Awesome.
And we'll
Come to
just
have amazing coffee, practice your English,
see what
meet
happens.
people, connect. Incredible. San, thanks for joining, man.
Hey, thank you,
Appreciate
man.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Have a
Talk to you
great
later.
day. Yeah, and
Yep,
thanks again. I'll see you.
of course. See ya.
Bye.